This is Privacy on the Ground, where privacy meets real life. Medical claims processors inside Chile's Social Security and Medical Insurance Agency, some of them doctors and health specialists with highly relevant and contextual health and medical expertise, hold in their hands the livelihoods and future health of thousands of people. They are responsible for deciding whether or not the government should pay wages when workers are on medical leave or cover other expenses such as occupational mental health-related costs. The majority of those medical claims are made by lower-income public and private sector workers seeking assistance so they can afford to pay other bills. Sometimes the agency is a last resort, administrative backstop for workers appealing medical claims in Chile. The people deciding on Chile's medical claims are under pressure from a heavy workload. In 2023, around 200,000 claims from people seeking assistance crossed the desks of 80 claims processors. Sound familiar? The situation is common among all levels of government around the world. A lack of funds, staff, and other resources. It's no wonder many governments, quite possibly the people running the city or town where you live, are using or at least contemplating use of AI to facilitate some aspect of their responsibilities. Like so many government agencies these days, Chile's Social and Health Insurance Agency has begun to use machine learning models to help its limited staff process the high volume of medical claims. The idea is to streamline and in some cases automate certain parts of that claims evaluation process. Use of AI and the tools used to govern and assess AI systems have upended traditional government processes. And in Chile, project manager Rodrigo Moya is caught in the middle. Moya heads up the Digital Transformation, Innovation, and Project Unit in the Technology and Operations Department at Chile's Department of Social Security Superintendence. The agency is known by its acronym, SUSESO. Moya must balance project time and resource constraints with the need to analyze risks and impacts of AI. And his work has entailed contentious debates about the use of automation when it comes to risky government decision-making affecting people's lives. So, this is the backdrop of the story I'll share with you today, with help from Moya and a colleague of his closely involved in assessing the AI he manages. I'm World Privacy Forum's Deputy Director, Kate Kay. As part of our ongoing AI governance-related research at World Privacy Forum, I interviewed people in Chile in 2024 and earlier this year about how that agency, SUSESO, purchased and assessed some of these machine learning models. There's a lot to learn from Chile. As governments and organizations around the world look to AI to ease workloads, what you'll hear about in this episode of Privacy on the Ground is a living case study. It reflects similar challenges people around the world may be experiencing when it comes to putting policy for building and using AI in a trustworthy way into practice. SUSESO wants to help speed up management and resolution of medical claims. So in 2023, the agency looked to tech vendors for help. Eventually, they decided a predictive machine learning model was the way to go. But when governments procure tech systems or other services, there's a deliberate, regulated process involved. They can't just pop over to Best Buy or order a software subscription on Amazon, at least not before some important steps are taken. So when SUSESO embarked on this project, Moya and his team were required to evaluate companies bidding to build the machine learning model. They considered traditional government procurement criteria, things like cost. But this time around, they also were required to consider new criteria. For about a year, from December 2022 to December 2023, Chile mandated that when government agencies purchased data science and AI-related tech, they also had to assess other things, such as statistical equity and bias-related risks of the decisions made by those systems. And they mandated that agencies ensure transparency and data protection in relation to how those systems are built and used. Those bidding terms were established by Chile's procurement agency, Chile Compra, and they were still a mandatory part of the tech procurement process when Moya and SUSESO evaluated vendors submitting bids for the medical claims model. Those new bidding terms would guide how the model itself would be assessed, too. Moya had pressure coming from many sides. There were thousands of medical claims to be dealt with. The agency wanted the project done fast. Medical claims processors wanted their workloads lightened. And workers in Chile, they wanted decisions about covering their wages. Meanwhile, Moya's team would have to balance traditional government procurement concerns related to cost and competition with this new set of trustworthy AI considerations. Eventually, Moya came to see that making those new assessment steps a mandatory part of the project bidding process was a thing he appreciated. Still, he admitted that at first he wasn't exactly happy about having to comply with the new terms, which would only layer on additional steps to the project's procurement and management process and add months to his timeline.
I have to be honest with you. When we, how can I say, when we start this project, I prefer not to use it. Why? Because I'm head of project unit. Then for me, it's very important the time and very important the resource. Okay, that's my job. Okay, then my boss asked me you have to finish this project on time and using the resource that you have. Okay, that's my job. Then when somebody tell me, okay, you have to use that terms, but if you use that terms, I think that your schedules of your projects will be changed because you need more time, because you have to introduce a stage additional, and I say no, I don't want it, but you had to do it.
Moya has had a lot on his plate, and we're especially grateful to him for taking the time to prepare to speak in English for this episode of Privacy on the Ground. SUSESO's medical claims model is not yet fully deployed as I record this episode, but digging into the details of the procurement terms and the guidance they provided, it reveals a lot. It helps us understand how those terms and their guidance measure, and how They've been used by evaluators of the medical claims model, and it helps reveal areas for improvement. When it came time to assess the model, including its risk of producing discriminatory decisions, and to help explain how the model makes those decisions, SUSESO had assistance from the Ethical Algorithms Project at GovLab UAI, the Public Innovation Laboratory at Chile's Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez's School of Government. Mariana Herman is a researcher in GovLab's Ethical Algorithms Project who has worked closely with SUSESO to evaluate the medical claims model.
I have a background in computer science and hold a Master of Science in Data Science. And my specific role in GovLab is focused on ethical and responsible AI research. I explore how to bring from theory to practice these ethical AI principles such as transparency, beneficence, privacy, fairness, justice, all of them in data science and AI models that are either under development or already developed in public agencies in Chile.
Herman and I spoke at length about the specific measures used to evaluate the medical claims model, fairness measures such as disparate impact or metrics used to explain model decisions, and we discussed caveats to those measures. We'll dig into those details on those measurements in a forthcoming episode featuring my full talk with her. Still, while we won't go into tons of depth on that in this episode, it is helpful to understand some of the complexities that were involved in implementing the bidding terms and the assessment process they called for. As part of her work with SUSESO, Herman and others at GovLab participated in regular meetings. They discussed technical and strategic decisions related to how the medical claims model was developed, including debates about the variables used to train the model.
This was a topic of extensive discussion. We all have different opinions of like which variables should be included or not. We didn't want to focus only of variables that were important purely for mathematical predictive power in the model, but also take into consideration ethical and privacy.
When training the model, it was important to exclude some sensitive variables common in medical claims data. But GovLab argued that some sensitive variables that don't necessarily affect the predictive performance of the model were needed to evaluate fairness, such as age and nationality of patients, as well as of doctors evaluating the claims.
If you exclude those variables, then you cannot measure fairness according to those variables. We argued to include these variables.
Herman has used tools built by GovLab to assess the medical claims model, including tools that address algorithmic transparency and measure bias and equity impacts. And the company that built the model used additional fairness metrics that were specifically suggested in the bidding terms guidance.
There's also like a lot of debate or whether what tools are the best or not. So I think people need like a base of what can we use, what can we cannot use. These tools are never required, but they are suggested, and transparency and fairness are required. So that's why the company decided to use those tools.
Understanding how people involved in the project applied that guidance, the metrics they chose to use and how, it raises some valid questions and helps show the importance of not only assessing AI systems themselves, but of assessing the tools used to govern them and the methods and metrics baked into those tools. For example, the bidding terms suggested some approaches to measuring model fairness and for explaining how the model makes decisions, but applying the methods inappropriately or in improper contexts could lead to misinterpretations of their results. And those bidding procurement terms did not necessarily provide this level of nuanced guidance. Chile's bidding terms were detailed and relatively thorough. Still, there were some aspects of applying and interpreting the assessments that were not directly addressed and therefore open to interpretation. That led to some internal debate among SUSESO staff regarding how best to use the model when deciding claims. In one key example, some fairness measurements indicated that the medical claims model could create minor likelihood or risk of inaccurate or biased decisions in some cases. Some people inside SUSESO believed that because the fairness measurements showed low likelihood of bias or inaccuracy, that proved that the model was suitable to automate the claims decision process entirely. But Moya, he disagreed. He suggested that even that small likelihood of bias or inaccuracy demonstrated there was enough of a risk that a wrong or discriminatory decision could be made that the model should not be used to automate medical claims decisions. Instead, he told me he believed it should be used only to inform or support decisions that were ultimately made by human experts. In other words, Moya said he believed the doctors and health specialists who serve as SUSESO's medical claims processors should make the final decision, not the AI model. Of course, questions related to the interplay between humans and automated decision systems abound. How and when should humans be involved in making decisions when automated or algorithmic systems are in use? How should AI governance measures be applied and interpreted in relation to human involvement in the decision-making process? Are there ways AI policy and governance tools might more adequately address these questions and offer more meaningful guidance? This stuff is layered and deeply complex, but these human in the loop related questions, they illuminate why it's so important to understand how AI governance tools like Chile's AI bidding terms are actually used in practice. What Moya and his colleagues have grappled with here goes beyond what needs to be assessed and even beyond what measures and metrics should be used to conduct those assessments. This goes to a deeper layer. It's about how people inside government agencies interpret the results of model assessments. How do those assessment results factor in when they're deciding the ways an AI system is ultimately used? For Moya and his colleagues at SUSESO, it's about how the model should or shouldn't be used when medical claims processors are evaluating workers' cases. Again, as this episode is produced, there is still no clear answer about whether the model will be used to support human decisions or to automate decisions entirely. Still, Moya did tell me it would be helpful for governments to provide guidance on these types of questions about interpretation of assessment results when it comes to determining how best to use AI models.
If the central government, for example, give us some instruction or give some guides to know which one is the possibility for us to use the model? In which way is the correct way? I think that in our country it's necessary. I think that our authority in many institutions, I think that they need guides to know how we can use, but in an operative way. Okay, we can use in the real case. Okay, we can use artificial intelligence, that model. I think that in our country we don't have that guide.
In addition to these questions about human interaction with the model, human agency in relation to machine decisions, Moya told me he would have preferred that the bidding terms placed more emphasis on a vendor's capabilities and experience related to data protection, reduction of model bias, and ensuring model transparency and explainability rather than heavily weighing more traditional criteria, such as vendor cost. Of course, no matter how thoughtfully crafted an AI governance tool may be, it might never directly address every contingency. The bidding terms as a tool of AI governance, they may not have been perfect, but Moya told me he appreciated that they were mandatory. Today, they aren't. In December 2023, after a year of mandatory use, Chile Compra revoked the bidding terms for data science and AI projects, along with other procurement templates. This was to allow for adjustments to those documents in relation to a new public procurement law in Chile. In the meantime, government agencies in Chile acquiring AI and data science-related tech have referred to a voluntary procurement directorate. While it offers similar guidance about assessing AI models, it is not mandatory. Now, you'll recall that even though the terms were mandatory when Moya and SUSESO embarked on the medical claims model project, he was reluctant to use them at first. But in the end, Moya told me he changed his mind. One goal of Chile Compra's short-lived mandatory terms was to incentivize companies. If they wanted to win government contracts, they had to build trustworthy models and systems and show some proof. Moya said the procurement terms accomplished that goal and helped convey the importance of the new assessment criteria to people in other units within his agency. Eventually, he came to realize the value of the government requiring those additional assessments as mandatory when evaluating vendors and the models they build. Otherwise, he said, project managers like him with resource constraints and pressure to complete projects quickly might prefer not to conduct voluntary assessments at all.
And I changed my opinion. I mean, I'm honest with you, okay? I changed my opinion because 1 year ago, I said, no, I don't like these terms. I have to add 2 months, 3 months in my project. It's a problem for me, okay? In a view of a boss of a project unit, okay? For that reason, it's necessary to be mandatory, that terms. Because it depends only for the boss of unit projects, they will be prefer don't use it.
Use of AI in government has policy implications. When government bodies use algorithmic and more complex machine learning models to automate or even just to inform decisions that would otherwise be made exclusively by humans, those systems, in essence, make policy decisions. Scholarly researchers have analyzed the limits of traditional government procurement approaches and recognized the need to update them to address the impacts of digital and AI systems. But unless your local or national government is flush with cash, resources, and staff, it's likely they are using algorithmic scoring or machine learning models, or at the very least contemplating using them to facilitate some aspect of their responsibilities. The sorts of decisions Chile's medical claims model will inform or possibly automate will affect people's lives. Their ability to take time off for medical treatment, or their ability to cover household expenses while in recovery. So, Moya's questions about using algorithmic models in conjunction with human decision makers are serious ones. Elsewhere, use of these types of systems by governments have had devastating effects on people and even led to legal and political repercussions for governments. Algorithmic scoring systems used for social welfare and tax-related decisions in recent years by government agencies in France, Australia, and the Netherlands have led to financial ruin for people, lawsuits, political scandal, and resignations of government officials. The tools used to govern AI systems, they're still nascent. And as Chile's case shows us, they're still evolving. Now is the time to dig in, assess them, understand how they actually measure and how they are used on the ground. At World Privacy Forum, we've been researching these problems for more than 2 years now, and we've only just begun. Special thanks to Mariana Germán, Rodrigo Moya, and their colleagues at the School of Government at Adolfo Ibáñez University's GovLab, Maria Paz Hermosilla Cornejo, and Renel Taberas Soto, for their generosity, insights, and assistance in researching and producing this episode. If you want to wonk out on the metrology behind Chile's medical claims model assessments, look out for our next episode featuring my full interview with Mariana Germán, who has worked closely with SUSESO to evaluate their medical claims model. And stay tuned for more of this series on AI governance tools on the ground. Later, we'll dig into how Canada's algorithmic impact assessments are applied inside government and how they're used by others affected by them. I'm Kate Kay. Thanks so much for listening to Privacy on the Ground.